A SOUNDsational season is happening at the Disneyland Resort, celebrating 2 new attractions, The Little Mermaid, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, and Star Tours, The Adventures Continue, and new entertainment, Mickey's SOUNDsational Parade. But as with all things, there is a history and heritage that has led to this point.
The dock ride is something that you ride in on a car and you see various scenes and so forth, okay? That's, simply stated, that's what it is. There used to be, as far back as 1900, various forms of dock attractions. There was walk-through fun houses, and more notably, there were what the industry called old mills. Okay, some people coined them as tunnel of loves, where you'd get into a small boat and you'd go into, back then it would be a wooden tunnel, and they had a paddle wheel that would actually push the water to generate current. They had scenery inside these rides. They cropped up in quite a few parks. That was their form of a dock ride back then.
The old mills proved very popular with guests at amusement parks at the turn of the century. The one drawback? They were extremely expensive to install and operate.
In 1928, in the Tumbling Dam Amusement Park in Bridgeton, New Jersey, the 2 owners of the park, Leon Cassidy and Marvin Rempler, they couldn't afford to have an old mill installed. They wanted to do something else. So what they did was they took a Dodgem car and they modified the bottom of it. And then they took a single rail track and they wanted to see if it would run on that. Now, once they realized that it could run properly, they took an older building and they laid down this single rail track and they had themselves a dock ride. The 2 business partners were there one day when some patron came out of the ride and he said, "Wow, I just feel like I was twisted around like a pretzel." So they said, "That's it, let's call it pretzel." Because this ride was so successful, other parks, non-competing parks, were saying, "Can you 2 guys install one for us at our park?" So they purchased some land, built a factory not too far from where the park was, and they started building them. You know, they went into business. It became the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company.
It didn't take long until dark rides built by the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company or their competitors had become staples in amusement parks around the world. By the 1950s, Walt Disney was no stranger to the dark ride.
Before, when Disneyland was being thought up, he and his teams would go out and do trips all over the world, United States and everywhere else, to look for things that they want to pull pieces from and bring into Disneyland. Carnivals were a great use of dark black light paint on their dark rides, their dark scary rides. So he had seen it before. That's the kind of thing that all the teams brought to Disneyland.
And the dark ride was one concept that Walt did decide to bring to the park.
There were 3 what we call dark rides here at Disneyland on opening day. They were in Fantasyland, and they were kind of pocket versions of 3 very popular Disney animated features: Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, and Peter Pan.
Now, over the years, up until the opening of Disneyland, there have been 14 feature animation films created. I don't think it's a mistake that these 3 were chosen for the 3 dark rides that we had on opening day. Peter Pan's Flight, you had this very nice romantic attraction. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, you had a thrill ride on flat ground. And also Snow White's Scary Adventure, a scary dark ride. So those 3 satisfied 3 different audiences, and I don't think that was a mistake. I think Walt was pretty shrewd doing that.
The animation of characters and figures in the early Pretzel dark rides was fairly crude, but it was achieved by very inventive means.
They didn't have, at that particular time, a way to mechanize these things, animate these things. So they would put these paper mache heads in black boxes, and what would happen is you would go over a lever on the track, and the weight of the car would pull them up by a cable, and a light would go on, you'd see it, and it would startle you because you weren't expecting it.
Walt and his team had animated figures for films and even attractions at the park, but as usual, Walt was looking for something more.
People have been fascinated for centuries with simulated attempts at life, animated toys and dolls and that type of thing. Clockwork automatons were made back in 15th, 16th century that would perform and write their names and do amazing things. And they were built by clockmakers that actually created these things, and they were given as state gifts to kings and queens. They were so valuable. So people have been fascinated with simulated life for many, many years.
Walt's first thoughts of dimensional motion were really spurred by a very small mechanical bird that he and his wife had purchased on a trip to New Orleans, Louisiana. And he was fascinated by the fact that it was just a simple clockwork mechanism, a little bird in a gilded cage, but that it had such an illusion of life and motion with such minimal function. So he had Wathel Rogers and Roger Brogy, who were two of his big mechanical geniuses who had come from filmmaking in the studio into helping work on the theme parks. He had them kind of take it apart and analyze it and see what made it happen.
From that modest beginning of reverse engineering, the team moved on to Project Little Man. Using film footage of dancer Buddy Ebsen, the Imagineers attempted to duplicate his movements on a 9-inch figure using electromechanical means.
It moved, but it wasn't the illusion of true life that Walt was looking for. So it was a start, and it got them all thinking, but it wasn't for a couple years until really the process came into full flower.
All of this started right here in 1963 with Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room.
The Tiki Room was a huge success, and it would pave the way for the next generation of audio animatronics figures.
Walt Disney was developing the 1964 World's Fair and started to use some space technology that was being developed to control, hydraulic systems to make the figures move.
The New York Exposition of 1964 is the greatest World's Fair of all times. This is what we call our Imagineering department. It's where we dream up our new projects for Disneyland or World's Fairs. You might be wondering how an animation studio like ours got into the World's Fair business. And frankly, I've often wondered about that myself.
Walt definitely got into the fair business with a commitment to produce multiple pavilions.
Not just one like a normal person, not 2, but 4 major pavilions were committed to by Walt and constructed for that fair. And audio animatronics, true audio animatronics, played a role in all of them.
The pavilions included Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, It's a Small World, the Carousel of Progress, and the Ford Pavilion, featuring nothing less than life-size dinosaurs.
Elements from each of those pavilions made their way to Disneyland. So because they were able to create these audio animatronics in such short order for these pavilions, the technology grew so quickly that it was only a matter of a couple years before this little wax museum Walt had planned for New Orleans Square became the full-blown theatrical Pirates of the Caribbean that we know today.
Three months after the untimely passing of Walt Disney in December of 1966, the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction opened its doors to guests of the park. It was a throwback to the old mill rides with its water and boat-based system for moving guests through the attraction, but a leap forward with its huge cast of audio animatronics figures. 2 years later, the Haunted Mansion opened at the park, this time using the Omni Mover system, developed at WED Enterprises by Imagineers Roger Brogy and Bert Brundage. The system used a continuous moving track of cars to allow for a maximum number of guests to move through the attraction. Rails beneath the floor would cause the vehicle to rotate, allowing for control of the rider's line of sight. Today, dark rides and audio animatronics come together once again in the latest attraction at Disney California Adventure.
The Little Mermaid is actually the first dark ride based on a Disney fairy tale princess for many, many decades. This is a traditional dark ride in that we have an Omnimover system, which is classic for Disney, and we tell the story of the Little Mermaid. When we set out to do attractions at Disney, we want to immerse you in the whole environment, and I think we did that really well with the Little Mermaid. The fact that we take you under the sea and take you to her whole world, and we had a lot of fun creating that whole environment.
And in that immersive environment, you will find state-of-the-art audio animatronics figures.
In today's audio animatronics work, we always strive to do more than we've done before. And that certainly is the case with The Little Mermaid. We had challenges, number one, making Ariel look like she's actually underwater. So we spent a long time and a lot of research adding the elements that make her hair actually float and move underwater. We also had challenges with small characters like Sebastian, who's teeny, 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 and we had to put his eye functions in this teeny little head. So the technology had to catch up for us to work into the design that we were creating. But the neat thing is, they're still the classic audio animatronic characters. They still come to life, they still have that character, and they're moving and talking. We just added the technology that is available to us today to push them even further than they've ever gone. Ursula sits in Ursula's lair, and she's a big girl. She's 7.5 feet tall and 12 feet wide. And she's really amazing because as opposed to Sebastian, who has a little teeny bit of real estate to put his mechanics in, we've got a lot for her, but then she's really, really big, really heavy, a lot of skin on her, but she's also got to move fluidly and you know, move like she's a serpent underwater. So the challenges there were to make a lot of skin move and not wrinkle, or at least wrinkle as a natural person would wrinkle.
That kind of attention to detail is the hallmark of not only the Disney audio animatronics, but also the attraction as a whole.
The Little Mermaid is full of a lot of wonderful little details if you look. For instance, in the Kiss the Girl scene, they're not really noticeable, but they're two little frogs that actually kiss and try and create a mood for Ariel and Eric. It's really cute because you see their lips moving. In Ariel's grotto, we've got all of the props that you see in the film, and we've taken great detail to replicate them exactly. So you'll see, you know, different props, and actually as you go up further in the grotto, you'll see all of the vases and pictures and things that she's taken from shipwrecks. And there's so many details there that I think you're gonna have to go through it a few times to see everything. One of the things that we thought about a lot as we were designing The Little Mermaid is the use of new and old. We've got the new technology and the things that, you know, are available to us now, but we also use the old tricks that have been used since theater was first established. We have, you know, the way you light something, the way you move around something. We've taken all that into consideration. Sometimes in order to create an effect, you don't have to go with technology and what's, you know, new and improved. Sometimes it's just going back to a classic theatrical trick that makes the effect look really wonderful. And we've learned from the things that we've done in the past. Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, they're great gags and things that happen there, and we've used some of those lighting effects and different ways to show a special effect. The nice thing about Disney is we learn from everything we've done before. And I don't think The Little Mermaid could be created in the way that we did without the historical research, you know, that we've conducted. The Omnimover system was created quite a number of years ago, but every year it gets better and better and better with technology, and we got to benefit from that. Just like the animatronics, the audio animatronic figures have also progressed over the years. So everything that we did in the Little Mermaid characters was because of something we learned from before. Everything in audio animatronic figures is based on something that we've tried before. So it's always an iteration ahead as we move forward. We couldn't have done The Little Mermaid without all the historical research that's been put in and put into our attractions prior.
With The Little Mermaid, Ariel's undersea adventure to build from, the future looks bright for both dark rides and audio animatronics.
There is quite a history of parades here at the park. The very first parade was on opening day, and at that parade, Guy Williams was there, who was Zorro, and we had Davy Crockett, who was Fess Parker. Buddy Ebsen was here, his faithful sidekick. There were elephants, there were dancing American Indians, There was even a gentleman by the name of Walt Disney in the parade. So the opening parade was amazing.
And since opening day, parades have been a perennial favorite form of entertainment in the park.
We've had parades that have celebrated holidays like Easter and 4th of July and Christmas. We've had parades for our anniversaries. We've had parades just for fun. We've had parades that celebrated some of our most notable movies like Aladdin and Mulan and Lion King. Our guests absolutely loved it. It was one of the first times we did what we call a street show, where the parade actually stopped and did the street show. So it's very beloved. The other parade that comes to mind is Blast to the Past. 50s music, jitterbugging, fun. You can't go wrong with a parade like that, where guests actually got up, came out, and danced with our parade performers. So that was really a fun parade. But probably one of my favorite parades that we've ever done is the electrical parade. People know that parade, love that parade, and it was one of the favorites here for years and years.
And the latest in the long history of parades, Mickey's SOUNDsational Parade is sure to be a guest favorite as well.
We started thinking about what makes parades wonderful here at the park. Music and the sound and the feeling that you get. So we went back and started looking at the whole Disney library of music and discovered that there are so many songs that evoke so many different styles that we figured it would make a good parade.
But parades don't just spontaneously appear. Once the initial concept for a parade is decided upon, it takes a huge number of people to make it happen.
So we assemble a team, technical, art, music, voices, musicians, 100-piece orchestras. It all comes together. There are so many disciplines that the guests don't even realize that are happening backstage. There are hundreds of people that put on a parade as it comes down the street. Even though they only see 92 performers, they don't see this vast crew that is backstage helping out, everything from wardrobe, costuming. It's just an amazing team. Mickey's SOUNDsational Parade is just a wonderful parade about song and dance and all those wonderful stories that happen. I mean, we start with Mickey, and Mickey happens to be the leader of the band, and he also has a hidden talent. He really plays a mean drum. So Mickey plays drums in the opening unit, and we also have a drum line that comes down the street playing drums and kind of getting everybody excited about the parade. Then we have our Three Caballeros, kind of south of the border Brazilian feel. Mary Poppins with the Pearly Band. Each one of the units tells its own story. I'm supposed to watch the parade when I'm out observing and give notes and watch everything. I can't. I have to watch the guests. I see the little kids where the little boy goes, "Oh, Peter Pan, it's Peter Pan." Or I look and there's the little girl and she has on a Snow White dress, and suddenly Snow White goes by in front of her. To me, my favorite thing is to watch the guests, and they have been very nice to us. Most of our guests are very, very complimentary about this parade, and I think it's because it harkens back to our traditional parades where we have many, many, many characters out on the street. And the live musicians, people have told us that that's a very exciting thing for them. But the fact that in one place on the parade route, you can stand or sit and watch this amazing parade of characters come by with some incredible music. I think it comes together and our guests really enjoy it.
A flight simulator is a device that replicates the airplane. Try to duplicate the systems, the instruments, the feel, and modern technology visuals as if you were actually flying an airplane. Simulation goes back before the Wright brothers flew. In the glider era, They would actually look for strong winds, point the gliders into these strong winds, so the wings would try to fly, and the pilot could get a feel for what it feels like to be flying. So the first time he or she was in the air, they're not surprised by what the feel might be.
Shortly after the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, flight simulators began to develop right along with the fledgling aviation industry. And while early simulators were quite crude, they were often very effective.
They sit up in that top half barrel, and as they move, they're required to keep a bar horizontal with the horizon, which means you'll keep the airplane straight and level and not dive it in the ground or spiral into the ground. And it's manually operated. There's a person on each wing, if you'll call it that, and they move the airplane into different positions and situations as you'd fly in an airplane.
As technology advanced, simulators became more realistic, not only imitating the actual controls of an aircraft, but also the movement of flight.
Making the simulator motion as realistic as possible serves two functions. Of course, safety, cuts down on learning, saves money. But what you're trying to do is compress the time someone's in training, minimize the wear and tear on the weapon systems you have out there, and get that pilot in the cockpit as soon as possible and as safe as possible. And overall, the best value for doing that is the simulator.
Simulating motion was primarily used for flight training, but it wasn't long before other applications of the technology were being considered. In fact, in 1958, Walt Disney was granted a patent on his very own version of a flight simulator for his 1955 attraction, Rocket to the Moon. The attraction projected a moving image on the floor of where your rocket had been, and another moving image on the ceiling of where your rocket was going. The only motion on the attraction was contributed by vibrating seats. But in its own simple way, it was a forerunner to using a full-fledged flight simulator in an attraction at the park. The attraction went through a series of incarnations, including a mission to Mars, before closing down in 1992. 29 years after Walt's patent, a true flight simulator would find its way into the park.
Disney was working with the military on the notion of using a flight simulator in some way combined with the show element. And during that time, we were kind of going back and forth with them on how we might be able to get a flight simulator integrated into Tomorrowland. And then lo and behold, George Lucas came out with his Star Wars stories, and we found our perfect solution to combining a flight simulator with a show.
Disney had partnered with George Lucas in creating the Michael Jackson featured attraction Captain EO, which opened in 1986. The following year, in 1987, Star Tours officially launched.
Disney and George Lucas have been actually talking about reimagining the Star Tours attraction actually right after Star Tours first opened. We had talked to George about the notion of this being an ever-changing attraction, but with all his different stories, all those different episodes that came out over the years, we really wanted his whole trilogy to settle down a bit so that we could really pick the right period to relaunch Star Tours. Star Tours The Adventures Continue is picking up pre-Star Tours, so it's basically a prequel. We've gone back in time. We've actually picked between episodes 3 and 4, and we did that because it gave us that opportunity to pick the most destinations and the most characters. That way we were able to create all these different story combinations. Before, we were stuck with just the Moon of Endor, and that was the film that we ran through the attraction all the time. With digital technology, we were able to create all these different destinations as well as effects, giving us that opportunity to create 54 different story combinations for our guests. So really every time they ride, they experience something different. But also, it gives us the opportunity to change up the attraction in the future.
And attractions do change at the park. As Walt once said, Disneyland will never be completed. It will continue to grow as long as there is imagination left in the world. In fact, the location of Star Tours, The Adventures Continue, was once the home of another attraction called Adventures Through Inner Space.
Guests actually went in and shrunk down through a microscope to microform to see what science was about. We at Disney like to actually give a nod to those kinds of attractions when we come in and revamp. And in doing so, we have actually put several nods to the old attraction inside Star Tours The Adventures Continue.
In addition to a tip of the hat to past attractions, guests may also find familiar faces in the queue line.
Inside our attraction, our guests will find all kinds of fun, exciting new things. We've given things for our Star Wars fans to find, as well as our Disney fans.
Computer, whose bag is this? TK421? Why isn't he at his post?
Certainly one thing that a lot of our guests will notice is our Goose Droids, or our DSA units, droid security agents that are in our queue.
The Goose Droids are aptly named, as they are the repurposed audio animatronics geese from the former Disney attraction, America Sings. Their cousins can still be found in Splash Mountain today.
One other special thing that we put in our queue that a lot of our diehards will recognize is Rex, who becomes our pilot in the future in the original Star Tours. But if you look close enough, he's actually in our droid customs area, and he's actually being prepped for shipping because he needs some repairs.
But it's the ride in the simulator itself that takes center stage in Star Tours The Adventures Continue. And with the addition of crystal clear 3D footage, the simulation rises to another level of reality. And that, after all, is what flight simulation has always been about.